I am Lisa Sutcliffe, the Hertzfeld Curator of Photography and Media Arts here at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation with our special guests, Sheila Heti and Sara Cwynar. We have invited Sheila to Milwaukee to speak with Sara on the occasion of her first U.S. museum exhibition, Sara Cwynar, Image Model Muse, which opened last week and will be on view in the Hertzfeld Center through August 4th. The exhibition is co-organized with the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. So this evening's sponsors are the Museum's Contemporary Art Society and Photography Council. Thank you very much. And the exhibition's supporting sponsor is Livewire Productions. Our 2019 visionaries are John and Murph Burke, Sheldon and Marianne Lubar, Joel and Karen Quadracci, Sue and Bud Seelig, Jeff Yabuki and the Yabuki Family Foundation. And exhibitions in the Hertzfeld Center are sponsored by Madeline and David Lubar and the Hertzfeld Foundation. I'd like to take a minute tonight to remember Bill Haberman, who passed away last week. As president of the Hertzfeld Foundation, Bill was champion for the photography program at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Since 1985, the foundation, under Bill's expert guidance, has sponsored 65 exhibitions and enabled the purchase of nearly 400 works of art in the photography department alone. In addition to supporting the construction of the Hertzfeld Center for Photography and Media Arts in 2015, the foundation endowed my position in 2018, ensuring dedicated study and presentation of photography at the museum in perpetuity. Bill was a great advocate for photography, but also a great friend to our department, and he will be dearly missed. Image Model Muse explores how color and design operate politically, socially, and historically, particularly in the context of how we conceptualize beauty. This exhibition presents 3 of Sara Cwynar's latest films: Soft Film from 2016, Rose Gold from 2017, and Cover Girl from 2018, as well as photographs that consider the relationship between reality and its reproduction. I'm not going to talk too much about the work because I want to give Sara a chance to do so herself. So now I'm happy to introduce our speakers, who will take us through some of the themes running through the exhibition. Sara Cwynar received her Bachelor of Design from York University in Toronto in 2010 and her MFA from Yale University in 2016. Her work involves a constant archiving and representation of collected visual materials. She is interested in the way that images morph, accumulate, endure, and change in meaning and value over time, and the effect this has on a collective worldview. Cwynar has exhibited internationally at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Dallas Museum of Art, Oakville Galleries, Foam Photography Museum in Amsterdam, Fondazione Prada in Milan. Her work can be found in the permanent collections of the Guggenheim Museum, the Dallas Museum of Art, SF MoMA, the Pompidou, Milwaukee Art Museum, Art Gallery of Ontario, among many others. She is represented by Cooper Cole in Toronto and Foxy Production in New York. She was born in Vancouver, Canada, and currently lives and works in Brooklyn. Sheila Heti is the author of 8 books of fiction and nonfiction, including novels Ticknor, Motherhood, and How Should a Person Be, and the story collection The Middle Stories. She was named one of the new vanguard by the New York Times book critics, a list of 15 women writers from around the world who are, quote, shaping the way we read and write fiction in the 21st century. In 2013, Time listed her as one of the 150 most influential people in the world. Her books have been translated into 21 languages. Her most recent novel, Motherhood, was chosen by the book critics at the New York Times as one of their top books of 2018, and New York Magazine chose it as their top book of the year. Her novel, How Should a Person Be, was named one of the 12 new classics of the 21st century by Vulture. It was a New York Times notable book, a best book of the year in the New Yorker, and was cited by Time as one of the most talked about books of the year. A limited number of signed copies of these books are available in our bookstore, should you wish to pick up a copy after the talk. Heti's play, All Our Happy Days Are Stupid, for which Cwynar designed the cover when it was published, had sold-out runs at the Kitchen in New York and Videofag in Toronto. She is currently developing a new play called The Dugout. She is the former interviews editor of The Believer magazine and has conducted many long-form print interviews with writers and artists, including Joan Didion, Elena Ferrante, Agnes Varda, Dave Hickey, and John Curran. Her fiction and criticism have appeared in The New Yorker, McSweeney's, Book Forum, N+1, Granta, the London Review of Books, and elsewhere. She has spoken nationally and internationally at museums, universities, and festivals, including the Museum of Modern Art, the New Yorker Festival, the Hammer Museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, Princeton University, Columbia, and Brown University. She is the founder of the Trampoline Hall Lecture Series, appeared in Margot Williamson's film Teenager Hamlet, and sporadically posts new episodes to her podcast, Podcast with Raisins. She lives in Toronto. So please join me in welcoming Sheila and Sara.
So I'm gonna start by talking through an older project from 2014, which is called Flat Death. And it begins with these pictures that I found at the New York Public Library picture collection of floral arrangements from the 60s and the 70s. And I found these pictures in this archive in the library and scan them and blow them up really big and remake them on the studio floor out of other objects. And I show this project first to kind of talk about the types of images that I'm interested in, which are ones that kind of have a very brief life or are really stylish or of the moment for a kind of short period of time and then fade quickly into kitsch or into something we'd rather not look at or something that's not valuable anymore. So for example, like a highly stylized floral still life might be an example of that, but like a picture of a Roman ruin would have an educational or historical value over a longer period of time. And I'm really interested in designed objects and images that have these sort of shorter lives and that change in meaning really quickly. So these still lifes are remade out of other objects that kind of shared a similar fate, so had a particular purpose that they've been drained of. And I won't talk about every picture, but these are some other ones. My work starts with thinking about how design works. My background is as a graphic designer. I worked at the New York Times as a graphic designer for 3 years. And I'm thinking about how design works and how what I'll refer to as popular imagery works. And by popular imagery, I mean a kind of like public shared archive of images that we're all familiar with, at least in a Western context, that come at us through magazines, increasingly through the internet, through history books, through advertisements, that kind of shape how we see ourselves and our history. And I'm working from an archive of materials like this that I collect and save and remake into new films and photographs. I'm really trying to think about the kind of power dynamics in sort of dead materials like this. Maybe I'll explain this picture. These are ones where I was collecting images of kind of ancient, or not ancient, but Roman ruins, and the other one is an Islamic dome, and pictures of kind of architectural sites that we consider like unimpeachably valuable and that have a sort of historical value that, you know, most people would agree on. And I was collecting plastic cups while I was making the floral installations, and thinking about how the design details of these historical architectural sites had kind of trickled down and been remade into new images in these plastic cups, and how kind of these images that we consider important resurface again and again and change in form and come back. And then other images, as I mentioned, just disappear very quickly. And so I'm remaking these kind of new, much junkier monuments out of the materials and trying to think about what is actually valuable. This is a toucan. This one, the foliage is remade out of synthetic plastic Post-it notes. And I'm trying to think about the kind of constructed nature of all nature photography, and the way that like what we think is like an objective nature photograph is actually taken by someone, often with great bias, like in this era probably by National Geographic or something, which we now know wasn't an objective view of the world. This is a watch still life. This is like a very prime example of something that was made at the height of style and probably immediately looked dated. It's from 1979, and I'm inserting more gold stickers to kind of, I was thinking about how someone took something that is like has a kind of basic value like gold and added so much of it into this picture that it no longer looks valuable or worth anything at all, and then I'm doing even more of that gesture. These are some other images. This series is installed in a kind of line, so all the images are these sort of familiar tropes of photography, like the architectural photograph or the nature photograph or the studio still life, and they look like something you've seen a million times, and they're sort of installed so they wash by you, but then when you look closer, nothing is actually what it seems to be. I think I got a little off track there. Oh yeah, and I'm also kind of thinking about how a lot of the sort of forces of how design works and how images kind of work their way into our brains and shape the way we think about the world are easier to see in a recent history than in the kind of mess of what's happening all around us. So often I'll pull things from a really recent past in order to talk about the present and to try to connect different moments in time. And I also use a lot of design strategies that I learned working as a designer in service of a critique of the way that design and advertising work. And I'm really trying, and this is why I sort of started making films, which I'll get to now, obviously. I'm trying to like situate an individual approach within these forces and not just talk about how images work or like how there are so many images now, but to think about how it feels to live in a world like that, and when there's so many choices that could be made every second, and when things come at you from everywhere all the time. So I started to make film with that in mind, and this is the first film that I made. I'm just going to show a 3-minute excerpt of it, and it's on view downstairs. It's called Soft Film. It's shot on 16 millimeter. It's made almost entirely by myself with the help of one person. And I think I'll just show the excerpt and then talk about it after.
Soft misogyny.
The everyday surrealism of
The
thrown
texture
away
is here
objects.
right in front of me, but can I convey it to you?
How does design
What can you do
fail?
with no time and no money?
How do things become a glitch instead of an intention?
What is that, pamphlet-sets?
A palimpsest.
Palimpsest.
As
pamphlet-sets.
of objects, the way you can control them.
I will only mention a couple other men here. I will steal their
The
thoughts
information
like I do
a
my
photo carries
pictures.
sits on its
Surface
surface,
and
not within its body.
Palimpsest.
Look at this beautiful presidential bust.
I accept
Gray
everything.
comb
Under city bench. A soft
Example.
misogyny. There are these Nike shoes I got. I build them on a website. Then they appear to me in real life 6 weeks later. Is there a better alchemy than that? But they are pudgier and puffier than they were in the picture, too plasticky, the wrong shade, like a pair of hands in another set of photographs I found. Who was this man? How did he get that scar on his upper right hand? The eBay boxes often smell like cigarettes when
I
you
can't
open
sleep.
them. So I comb eBay. Of course I can't sleep. There is too much to look
Through
at.
that one?
A
Yeah.
faded, an impulse to buy because this object truly is one of a kind.
The inalienable object.
Picasso
have
or
no
a family
price.
heirloom.
It's inalienable.
The inalienable
I'm
object.
sorry. No. Thank you. Sorry. I like beautiful humans too, and how they reflect on me. But mostly I find myself a little bit about my business. Things that are almost already gone the same moment they arrive. Some sort of way that you acted like it was cute. Things made new that will look better representation of what you thought was dead. Apparently, if you make a picture of something immaterial that cannot be bought, a reversal of the usual way this impulse from works. From the point of view of industrial
Because it cannot be
culture,
consumed,
it is
only
useless. Contemplated. Example, an impossible object like a four-dimensional cube. Why would you make anything new when there is so much already? Or my favorite example is an intestine during digestion. So this uselessness of pure information will
This is
permit
important
humans to
to
escape
pursue
some
a meaningful
cycle of
life for the
capital.
first
Listen
time.
to me.
Especially
Be free to pursue play. That's what I'm going to do. 2,000 yards, $1.50. I go back to this factory, Remgrit. Initially, I am attracted to the pink and blue sign. If you break in, you will find old paychecks from the 1980s, as if everyone just left the office one day and never went back. Objects are shocking because they stand in our way. They are where they ought not to be. And understanding has to do with the eyes. I find these pictures from South Korea in the 70s. A Kenyan businessman is passing through a new factory. The woman gets me. She only appears sometimes. What happened after? I wasn't able to find out much, this is South Korea. What I know. A single smiling woman who appears again and again and again. What did her house look like? Did she really match the interior? Did she own many things? Was this color the style of the time, or has it faded into that? Thank you so much. What would I do if I was there? Would I say, fuck you? Everything is sold as is and no returns. Do you mind telling me where to look?
Okay. So I won't talk too much about that because we can talk about it. But it uses those objects of the soft jewelry box as a sort of vessel to talk about this term soft sexism or soft misogyny that was in the news at the time. And it also kind of uses objects that I'm buying on eBay to think about how value kind of has a slipperiness or an arbitrariness, and how something can mean so much to one person and nothing to somebody else. And then I'm trying to connect the way that we value objects to the way that we value others, and connect that to kind of a discussion of feminism, and use these objects to talk about other things. I think that's all I'll say about that for now. So the next film that I made is called Rose Gold, and it, similarly to soft film, uses an object as a starting point. This time it's the rose gold iPhone. And when the rose gold iPhone came out, I was like, this object contains everything I care about in one thing. It's perfect. It's like this object where color is used as a selling point, which I'm really interested in, how like the kind of emotional affect of color or emotional valence of color, and how it's used on us in ways that we don't think is happening, or how also it, like old things that we already have will be sold along new color lines. So I was trying to connect the rose gold iPhone to, you'll see in this excerpt, these plastic cups called melamine that were like an object that you already had, but they were sold with new colors like goldenrod and chartreuse in the 70s. And they were these kind of loved, optimistic objects, and they were supposed to be indestructible, but over time they stained with whatever you put in them, and it turns out that they weren't indestructible, and they kind of changed from being this like very optimistic, loved objects to forgotten kitsch. And I'm trying to say that maybe the rose gold iPhone will have, or is already having, the same fate. And yeah, to think about how the same cycles kind of repeat, and then also to use this object to talk about all sorts of other things. So this will be a 3-minute excerpt too, and then that will be at the end of this presentation.
They invented this color, rose gold, and I'm mesmerized. A new object of desire. I totally fell for it. It's almost embarrassing enough to blush. There was a time when we were able to draw up an encyclopedia, an exhaustive catalog of all the objects in the world. Since then, everyday objects, every possession is an extension of my world is fragile.
One gesture away from losing all access to sustaining the fantasies I need.
What is a good life when something you desire is actually an obstacle to your The name of a color is the result of a segmenting between other colors, orange and new colors for old things. I hear that the gold iPhone was for the Chinese market, where gold still really means something. Art Nouveau exploded.
I keep finding watch advertisements where all the clocks are set to
I read
8:20.
terms like anadigi. Well, new old terms. What time was it really? I go to check what time the Apple Watch is set to. And I find myself wanting one. What
Material
kind of person
feel
am
of
I?
a year or an age.
Intuition is the work of history translated through personal memory.
But
How much can you
do I
fit
really
in the
need
cloud?
to remember?
You forget when you learn to use your inside voice.
When did you learn to
A
swipe?
red gold called
Arius
Arius
in
in
Greek.
Greek. And rose revolutions.
Easier for the
Ukraine
West
was
to
orange,
digest.
pink, lemon, or tulip in
Every
Kyrgyzstan.
political gesture associated with democracy was branded with a color. Several male artists I know have told me that I am having a moment.
As if the moment will pass soon.
Rose Gold is having a moment too. Things travel to their destinations.
What is the right way to talk about something? Do people understand more if you communicate through things bought and sold? I keep buying these plastics called melamine, evergreen, corsage. I find blue rose too. Royal, yellow rose, red. Why is mustard 1970? Melamine was mass-produced as colorful by a corporation called American Cyanamid. This product was marketed as indestructible. Cyanamid was the sole producer of buttons for U.S. military clothing. Part of the reason they fell out of favor was that they stained and faded with
Seafoam
use, stone
green,
gray,
copper
stained
rose.
brown from coffee and
I think
soup.
about repetition.
He tells me that optimism is the force that moves you out of yourself to be closer to satisfying something that you can't generate on your own.
I know
full
full
well
well
you would do anything. But it's the wanting, not the having. Same with people as in objects. Rose gold doesn't need to be anything at all. Just an idea in
something
the
to
air.
look forward to.
A kind of metabolism of the object.
The desire to have some impact on the world in relation to its impact on me. The cardinal theme of advertising.
So this is a bird, and this is a bird, and this is a mouse, and this is a mouse. This is a tree, and so is that. This is rose, and this is gold. What do words have to do with anything? Or pictures, for that matter.
And something else. I love the rose
Bold
gold
divisions between people and things are confused in this magical object. Out on the border between Arizona and Nevada, operated by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, style Art Deco, opening date 1936. Rose gold is flattering to most skin tones. Rachel, dark Rachel, dark, dark. Who is
And
dark
what is dark,
Rachel?
dark? Who is the voice of authority here?
And who is this object actually for?
Okay. Thank you. I love that. The rose gold iPhone. I read in an interview that you actually got it in the end.
Yeah.
You bought it. Did you get it after you made this?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, how that changed, because to me the rose gold is all about desire and this idea of like this distance from it. There's this sort of lust for it, and I was just wondering, when you actually got it, how did that change your relationship to rose gold as an idea or as a?
Yeah, I immediately stopped caring about it. I mean, like when it came out, as I said, I was like so captivated by it because the Apple copy like for it was really kind of like modernist, optimistic, like the best thing has finally been invented and it's here and it's this, and I was really intrigued by that too. Like it seemed like a really old way of selling something. And it was totally inaccessible when it first came out. It was like $900. And then I got it once no one wanted them anymore, and it was like free with your Verizon plan. So it stopped being so. And they kind of look bad in cases, and you can't tell it's rose gold anyway, and it's like not actually a good object. It's like the same thing as the shoes in the first video.
Right.
Like, yeah, so you're totally right. It's just about wanting it.
Yeah, I wonder, I have this curiosity about how you collect the objects that you use in your studio. It seems like you create a sort of archive that you can work from in your own studio, and so much of what you get is from eBay. And I just am curious, like, what a session of yours is like when you're sitting in front of the computer. Like, how do you, what does it look like if we're standing behind you? How do you collect your materials?
Session is an interesting word. I wish it was like I would sit down and have a session and just, but I'm like, I'll be on somewhere random and be like, oh, I know what I need. And then, I kind of am always checking my eBays. But I often will find something in the world and then like find every copy of it on eBay. So like the plastic cups, I found one in a store and then bought the entire like market for them on eBay at that time, which now there are lots of them again. But the presidential bust cologne bottles, it's the same thing. And then I'll do lots of searches like reclining nude woman on eBay, which is generally pretty disheartening, but some things are really good. And then I have it all in the studio in boxes. Like I don't have a good organizational system, and I was just like, I can remember I have something, and I'll look for it, and then I'll find something else.
Right. And then when you're making like a collage kind of like this, or you're putting things down, how much does it involve rearranging it once you've done the photograph, or is it only photographed once all the arrangement is done?
It's only it's photographed exactly where everything is. So like I'll change the colors a bit after, but I'll spend like this one I spent like 3 days climbing up and down a ladder looking through the camera, moving things, because I mean, I don't know if you can tell, like there are things that just really matter to me that no one else would be able to tell, but it's so hard to make something that's essentially made of what some might consider garbage, but I don't, but like look like it's not just a pile of stuff. Like that's my sort of constant challenge. So the like particular layering, like the way that perfume bottle makes a gold shadow there, the way that the circle kind of highlights a certain area, like I'll spend hours and days getting those things exactly how I want them to be. And I think you wouldn't know, but it's important. It makes it like gel into this thing. And also shooting through layers of glass, like these are constructed on layers of glass, allows for this like melding of things together.
Right. What is something that we wouldn't notice that took so much time, or that was the
well, like for example, that circle doesn't have any magnifying qualities. It's like retouched onto there, but I wanted it to look like it was a glass that was distorting somehow. I spent a long time trying to decide how that should look. Or like this, that like pantyhose thing that's sticking out on the right is the exact same shape as the armor that's above it. Those are things that I would spend a long time like trying to find objects that match each other formally, or like things that you can see through other things. There's probably a better example. I mean, yeah, like the way that woman's kind of looking through that green exercise ring is important to me. And this is a much denser one, so yeah, like I wanted to have sort of snippets of bodies and to have things kind of be unclear where they came from or exactly what they're doing, so that they sort of gel into this new thing and you're not thinking about like the specific history or what you think might be happening in any individual object, but they become one thing.
Right. And I have a question, actually. This reminds me of your films, because this Tracy series is so much, it seems to me, like a kind of collaboration in some sense between the two of you. Mm-hmm. And you've said before that her posing is sort of ironic, and it's like referencing the history of how women pose in art. And I think about the fact that you use male narrators for your first two films, which also you've said is like because there's an authority in the male voice, and then in this latest film, which I think coincides in time to these Tracy portraits, you're narrating it. It's not a
It's
male
a different
narrator?
woman. It's not me, but
So why did you make that change from the two male narrators finally to this woman?
yeah, that's a good question. I picked the male narrator because I wanted this kind of like I wanted it to sound like how an encyclopedia would sound if it talked or something, like this like really classic voice of authority voice. And then I wanted to have, and this happens more in rose gold than soft film, and soft film was like the first one where I was really just trying to figure out how to make anything that was a video, and but I wanted myself to like periodically interrupt him and say who's actually in charge.
He mispronounces
palimpsest, which is like the most annoying word anyway. And yeah, so I thought in the end, I did record it in my own voice, and Rose Gold had my own voice for a really long time. But then in the end, I think that the effect of like someone else being in your head and telling you what's supposed to be up, and then your voice kind of coming in and correcting it is more true to the like feeling of chaos that I was trying to create with the films. And then but then in the end, like, yeah, having a male narrator say this kind of feminist text is a bit grating or something. So I decided that the next ones will have female voices for that reason. But also, there's a way that a male voice kind of separates me from it a bit and makes it a little bit less diaristic that I think is important for the first two. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm also curious about the reception to your work, because you have these references, these cultural references, often that feel very American in a lot of ways to me. And is there a difference in the way that Americans and Canadians and Europeans take your work or interpret it? Have you noticed?
I think Americans feel more ownership over the objects, for sure. Like, a lot of people in America will be like, I remember when that was a thing, or like, I remember this period that you're talking about, in a way that maybe would imply that like a younger person shouldn't be interested in this era or something. That happens in America a lot. But I think like part of what's interesting to me about a lot of this stuff is like the ubiquity of American pop culture and cultural references, and there are these Japanese Cezanne, I don't think there's one in here, but Cezanne makeups that I have in a bunch of stuff that I thought were like fascinating. The kind of use of this like name that we consider the height of artistic value or something, used to sell makeup or used to sell like all sorts of other things.
And that red box, I think it's in one of the photographs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the Cezanne jewelry brand, but there's also a Cezanne makeup brand. But then I was interested in how like that kind of Western cultural reference is used in Japan, and so I don't know, I would like to know more about how people react differently in different places, but I haven't had that much opportunity to figure it out yet.
I'm also interested in your books, because you've made 2 books. And is there a sense of books being differently accessible? You like them because they're accessible in a way that objects in a museum, like a museum show, is not. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm curious about your ideas about accessibility, because you also, I've read you say that you don't like the way your images appear on the internet.
Yeah.
And so so that maybe doesn't seem like an ideal way for you to present your work. But then, of course, the museum has a very limited audience. But then, so what kind of audience is ideal, or what would be the ideal way of representing your work if the museum is too closed and the internet is too, I don't know why you don't like how it looks on the internet. Is it just that the colors aren't right, or that it's too small, or what's?
Too small.
Too small?
This is a good size. There's like so much detail that just gets lost, and I think it's hard to understand that it's not. There's like a way that a lot of them are using design or kind of strategies of advertising, as I mentioned, that I think just doesn't seem to transcend that when you see it small. Like, it looks like any other kind of designy thing on the internet sometimes, which I kind of like, but also I think unfortunately, a lot of people will just Google image search and then be like, oh, this is the art practice, and that's like really upsetting. But those are like one of the things that you just can't control what happens when something goes out into the world.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But you're doing like a big public art thing in Toronto in a subway station?
Yeah.
What's that going to be like?
It's going to be a huge mural-sized billboard that will be like a big layered photograph with writing on it, kind of similar to some of the pieces downstairs. And it works from the Kodak archive that I was telling you about,
Right.
because it'll be at the location where Kodak Canada was. And it kind of talks about the history of Kodak and like just sort of generally a kind of public history of photography, and then it'll be a huge billboard in a public space. So that's the best. That's the best way I've can imagine to show something, and I'm super excited about that. And I'm also making some stuff for Instagram, which I think will be cool.
What do you mean you're making some stuff for Instagram?
Like, I'm making something that will just be on Instagram, and I'm kind of excited about that as a platform, even though I have a lot of problems with Instagram too. But yeah, I mean, I think that's just as exciting as making like a big print for sure.
When's that going to come out?
I think in
when
June.
You start posting that in June.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the like ambivalent relationship you have to these objects, where you have there's like an element of nostalgic relationship to them, but it's also anti-nostalgic, and there's kind of a love for them, but there's, in some cases, mostly I see the love for these objects.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, over time, like how your, that complexity of the things that you choose to put in your art has changed, like how your relationship to those objects have changed, like from the beginning of when you started doing work like this to now.
Yeah.
Like, has there been any kind of untangling as a result of working with all these things that you have these
really
weird
good
feelings, like ambivalent relationship towards?
Yeah, I've realized more clearly what I said at the beginning, which is that like I'm mostly interested in things that like don't have their initial value, whatever that may have been, anymore, and also in things that have clearly been used by a lot of human hands before I got to them, in the way that like things kind of escape their original context. Like I just got 2 Braun desk fans from the 70s, and one is completely yellow plastic, and the other one someone kept in a box or something, and that's like really exciting to me to think about. But soft film tries to answer why I care about these objects, and to me that's like one of the unanswerable generative questions of my work. Like I can't explain why I like these things and why I like slightly old things, and I just can't answer it. But it's been like, it's always useful to try.
Has that been, you've been drawn to this kind of thing your whole life, or only once you started making art?
Yeah, no, I pretty much, even in undergrad, I made work that kind of looked like, was way worse, but kind of looked like this.
Huh.
Yeah, when it wasn't like, like I made these giant installations with tons of old stuff in them, even when I was like 18.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And when did that become something that you wanted? When did you think, I want to be an artist? Or like, were you making art since you were a child? Was this always the path that you were on?
No, like I was an English literature major and a poli-sci major, and then I dropped out of school for a long time, and then I worked in the mall, and then I was like, maybe art's something cool that people do. Like I didn't know art was a thing you could do, and I was a teenage figure skater, so I was like, yeah. So for 10 years, that's all I did. Like I didn't know really I didn't spend any time on anything else. It was not until I was like a bit, so I shouldn't say, I guess I was like 20 when I first went back to undergrad. And then I started making like crazy photo installations, but I even then was in graphic design school because I was too scared to try to be an artist, and that seemed more practical. And then I worked as a graphic designer, and then it was only after that, when I was like 26, that I started just making art full time.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't believe you were a teenage figure skater for 10. Like, were you a professional figure skater? You did competitions and so on?
Yeah, like I thought I was gonna make it to the Olympics.
Wow.
I wasn't really though.
And you had like the costumes and everything. I feel like this makes your art make some kind of more sense to me. Not that it didn't make sense before, but like something like even in this one, like this swirl, like I just feel like figure skating is all about like this movement.
Yeah.
And that's what's sort of transfixing. And I find your work so delicious in some sense.
There's
and
definitely
just
like
like figure skating and
Yeah.
watching figure skaters.
Yeah, and there's like a weird obsessiveness, I think.
Right. And
Yeah.
also, like, I know somebody who's like an athlete who became an artist. Do you feel like there's this
Yeah.
Can you speak about that?
Yeah, like a lot of like making the videos is really physical. Like I do everything by myself. I usually I'm like a control freak. I operate all the cameras by myself, like which is really hard. And yeah, I think there's like a willingness to like push myself physically really intensely that definitely comes from teenage figure skating. And to like, to spend like, a week moving these objects around is the same as like spending a week trying to perfect some random spin.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that the same things that would make you a teenage figure skater would also generally just make you like able to be an artist, which is that you'll kind of like commit to something really obsessively for a long period of time. Yeah, maybe I'm sure writing's the same.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I don't know if there's a lot of being alone when you're a figure skater? Or are
It's
you
a
always
very
in relation?
individualistic sport.
Yeah. Like, I don't know
In
if
a
you have a coach or
problematic way.
something there, or you're alone.
Yeah, a lot of it's just like spent alone, yeah. And performing,
endurance or something.
yeah, lots of that. And performing as a figure skater is like the loneliest thing in the world because
Right.
you're just like, it's terrifying. Anyway, enough about that.
I have so many questions for you. There's something that you're interested in, which is that stylish images are the ones that date most quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Is that a deliberate thing on the part of style to date, in order for us to consume more, to find that last thing ugly? Is that it, or is there actually something connected to the way the culture moves and
Yeah,
visual intelligence
I don't know.
moves?
I don't think it's just that like some masterminds at Apple are like, okay, we'll give them rose gold, but then we'll give them something else. I think it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like novelty works in such a way that you can't be the first thing. You have to be like the third thing when people are ready, and the first thing seems too weird, and then like the third time someone does it, it seems like it makes sense. And so you can watch those kind of cycles happen in fashion, like rose gold. The Acne did it before Apple did, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which is not really answering the question. But yeah, I guess it's like something we just feel like, something's cool, and then you just don't, and that's like one of the intangible things that I can't explain. And then as I get older, I'm like, I don't know what's cool anymore, but I know like what I see other people thinking is, and that's a really interesting position. And maybe, like, I guess these are kind of cop-out answers, but maybe that's another thing that I can never quite put my finger on, but is like one of the most interesting things to think about.
Like, are the objects that you recover, what phase of the cycle are they in?
Well, I think most of them are totally dead, but a lot of them are kind of like, will reference something that might be coming back into a moment. Like, I've been really interested in the fact that a lot of graphic design for the last like 7 years has been very nostalgic, and I wondered if that was some sort of relation to the terrifying political moment or something, like what everyone's making things that look like, well, everyone always has made things that look like Swiss design from the 50s, but even more so. And all these kind of yellowy colors, which are the ones that I love, are everywhere, and rose gold is kind of a nostalgic color. So I'll try to kind of, like, I get most excited when I find something that sort of touches on something that's more widely popular, but also is so clearly out of date, because it kind of will get at the point of the fact that the same cycles just happen over and over again, and that novelty production is actually very old, and it's like not about what's new, it's just about like what is acceptable.
And there's this thing that happens when you start to have build up work over the years, you know, and you know your own work, and you're familiar with it, and you're familiar with what you're drawn to and what you do. And I wonder, and there can be this tendency to sort of sometimes feel like, oh, I'm cheating now, like I'm doing what I know that I do. Does that happen? Are there certain things you have to avoid in working now?
Yeah.
When does that come in, that like resorting to what's
well,
easy?
I'm always trying to not use the objects anymore, but obviously that doesn't happen.
Like not use objects at all? Or
yeah.
the same objects?
Both of those things, but yeah, like I'm trying to make work now that doesn't use the objects, just as a challenge for myself. Like I have this set of materials that I know will look good, and like the grapes always look good.
So that feels like cheating to use the grapes?
That feels like cheating. I'll be like, the bottom corner needs a grape. But also then I'm like, what is the problem with that? I don't know. Yeah, I have a complicated relationship to that. Like I think, like rose gold, there's that line that I took out and put back in and took out and put back in that several male artists I know have told me I'm having a moment. Rose gold is having a moment too. And there, of course, like the art world uses up people in the same way that we use up these objects, and I don't want to necessarily care if I'm like using the same strategies if they're working, but for me. But on the other hand, like I understand that is something you're not supposed to do, I guess, or like, you know, there's all this pressure to make something that's brand new but not too different, and yeah like all these cycles of capitalism totally relate to being a human artist. So that's a good question in that regard, because yeah, I sort of like think about those things and care about them, and then really don't want to care about them. But just for myself, I'm trying not to use the objects, just so I can like challenge myself and keep making things interesting for myself, which is basically just the like ongoing challenge, like trying to make something I don't know how to make, so that I remain like really connected to what I'm making. Yeah.
Are there art careers that you admire that don't have that problem of, oh, that's rose gold, now we're no longer interested in this person's work, and then maybe we're interested again in 20 years? Are there people that you see that continue to be the interesting color for not dated?
I can never think of any artist when someone asks. Like I just was thinking, I mean, obviously I love Sarah Charlesworth so much. I don't know if, I really, now she's not alive anymore, so I wonder, like, I'm sure she didn't enjoy the kind of attention during her whole art career that she has now. But I feel like she made things with like a really strong sensibility and set of ideas for a number, like for many, many years, and it continued to feel new and interesting. Yeah, I mean, for example, like I love Kerry James Marshall, who has his set of ways that he works, but they always seem to turn into different things.
Yeah. And similarly, like when you, because I know this for myself as a writer, that there's I can think about certain memories where I sort of gave myself permission to do something that I thought was wrong, and that was like the beginning of my, I don't know, my style, or the way that felt like close to something in me, rather than doing what I thought writing was supposed to do. And I wonder if you can remember like moments of permission that you gave yourself.
Yeah, well, the stuff is definitely one of them. Like, And yeah, like I love trends. Like if I can identify a trend, I'm like, you know, a lot of people would run away from them, but I mean, everyone's using plexi these days, I think. But that's not the kind of trend I love or care about really. But like certain color palettes I know will look good. Making things in a series I know will look good, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do that. It's too easy. Like kind of variations on a theme, but then when you do them, and yeah, exactly, like I don't really see any reason to know some things like maybe too easy and then not to do it. Like I feel like, I'm also trying to really maximize the aesthetic pleasure of these images, which is part of like the conceptual idea, I guess you could say, but also feels just important to me to make something that's nice for people to look at if they're gonna spend any time looking at something I made. So that involves doing a lot of things that are like really easy or that I know are kind of like design tricks. Yeah, I love design tricks.
What do you mean design tricks?
Like photoshopping things into better colors, or like adding that circle on the other picture. Where did that go? Like that's not, you know, I guess I should have some like ideal that I stick to where the photograph is as it was in the world and I don't change it, but I just go back and I'm like, or like I mentioned this downstairs when I was talking, but I retouch in Tracy's face on all these photos so that she's like really popping and she seems to be coming forward on the same level as the objects on top of her. That's definitely, you could say that's cheating, I don't know. Because they are photographed as they are in the studio, but then everything is sort of changed. Or a lot of times it's just bringing the colors back into what they were in the world, but yeah.
One has such a sense of what you find attractive in images and in objects from looking at your work. I'm just curious what you find like disgusting when you look at pictures or you look at objects, like what really repels you that would never make its way into your work? Because it seems like everything is there, but obviously there's such a judgment, such an
that's so hard. I guess I should probably think of a specific artist, but I don't want to do that.
I don't mean a specific artist. I just mean like when you're looking at photo, you know, because you buy postcards on eBay and you find objects in the world that appeal to you. Like, is there just something in the history of like advertising or commerce that's just too ugly to be transformed?
I don't like bad lighting. Like, I really hate when things have bad lighting. So I come across a lot of stuff on eBay that's like content-wise perfect and badly lit, and I just can't deal with it. And then there's a certain era of where everything was printed on those sort of glossy, like quick print prints. I hate those. I don't like anything that's too busy. Like, I guess my sense of composition is pretty intense and specific. So, like, the things that are useful to me are often things that are pretty pared down. That's also why I'm interested in this time period of the 50s, 60s, 70s. Everything was, like, more pared down and simpler, and so it's easier to work with, but it's also just visually more appealing to me. So anything that's too busy, I won't like. Like, I really like simple objects and colors and images.
And can you just talk a bit about hands in your work? Because going through the show today, I kind of finally saw, hands are so important to you. Like in the videos, they're always making or moving things or readjusting.
Yeah, Tracy has good hands in that one. Yeah, like in the videos, I was first thinking about these kind of, like this one has a lot of hands in it. The hand of display, or like the way that hands are always presenting us with things to buy. And I don't know, like for example, in this picture, it's my hands reinserting all these objects into this still life, and I wanted it to be like many female hands touching this kind of unmoving male figure. And in a way, like, my hands are what I have to activate these things, like to make them into something else. Especially in the first film, it's really made with an economy of means and with what's available. So that's probably part of the reason there are so many hands. But and then in a lot of the pictures, like that I'll look at people are posing for the camera, they've learned how to control their face or their body, but hands often give away real human affect that you can't see anywhere else. Like, I've been really obsessed for a long time with this set of business trip photos that I found where it's this Kenyan businessman, or it's in the soft film excerpt, I guess, but this Kenyan businessman visiting South Korea, and everyone looks totally normal. Well, they're all like really posed for the camera, but their hands are everyone's making these like crazy tense hand gestures. And also, actually, to go back to your earlier question, hands are one of the things you're really not supposed to photograph. So I'm like always trying to make a good picture of hands. Like, they tell you not to photograph hands or babies or.
Who tells you that?
Like photography teachers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because they're awkward?
They're boring. They've just been done so many times that you can't do it well anymore.
Huh. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Do you want to take some questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Does anyone have, we have time for a few questions, actually. Oh, there's somebody right here. There's a microphone, actually. I think it's being recorded, so I think they want, or can he talk? Oh, you can just speak up. Yeah, ask your question.
Is there some element of archaeology in all this, or not at all?
What do you mean? Like, I guess I would think more of.
Not so much in like you started with like the Roman ruins or whatever, like that kind of archaeology, but like digging in the ground and finding stuff that got thrown away, kind of.
Oh, no. Sometimes I find stuff on the street. Yeah, I guess there's like a digital digging for sure, if that's what you mean. Like combing through, like literally going down pages on eBay for hours and hours. But yeah, I guess because I've become more specific in what I want, I can't just find things randomly anymore. So yeah.
This woman in the jean, is it?
So obviously in the Tracy series specifically, there's a lot of like color involved. Do you want to talk about maybe color theory, if there was any involved, specific keywords or emotions that you wanted to evoke with those specific colors that you used?
Yeah, well, like, so these grids are from color printing manuals, and they're like scanned and then resized as backdrops for her. And they appear in the film too, in rose gold. And I'm trying to kind of think about how certain colors take you back to certain times, like why mustard yellow is like for sure 1970s. I'm also thinking, like, I don't know, this is just part of this project, but these kind of refer to like Shirley cards in a way, or like the kind of like test materials that would be used to decide if photos looked right, often with great bias. And Tracy is someone I photographed for years and years, but she's not like the type of body that would normally be pictured in these kind of like classic modernist studio portraits. So that is part of the reference of the color grids. And then, yeah, they're just like, I don't know, I wanted her to be this woman floating on a grid, and you can't quite tell where she is, and you don't really know what time period you're looking at. Like, she's wearing this kind of anachronistic office casual clothing that's actually her own clothing. Like, she has a lot of, like, she picks how she looks. She does her makeup, she poses how she wants to. Except I'm like, do the pose, and then she does whatever she wants. So that's not really true. But it's like her style and her kind of is timeless in a way that's really interesting to me. Like, you can't quite tell what you're looking at, or what time period, rather, you're looking at. So the colors are kind of picked for that reason, too. Like, there are things that are clearly of right now in them. Like, for example, those red boots that she's wearing, I think are just really only would be made now. But then there are a lot of other things that are kind of not placeable. Yeah.
There's a question right here. I think there's a microphone coming.
I'm interested in how you feel about memes, thinking particularly because they are these sort of internet images that are fashioned for the internet, but also because they're extremely ephemeral and bountiful.
I mean, I love memes. Yeah, I don't know. I've never thought of making one. I guess you can't make one. It has to just happen. Yeah, I look at Instagram and like, you know, all those meme accounts, many meme accounts all the time, and I kind of feel like it helps me have some idea of what people are thinking about and looking at and wanting to look at. And it's interesting because you can like you can trace like political ideas through them for sure. Like there'll sometimes be like a like feminist idea that's surprising to me, and then you'll realize that like people are starting to accept that idea, for example, or like there is a way that those contexts kind of tell you things before other things do, and then there's like a casualness to them that I love. Like I guess that's like the way that we talk and communicate now, like even people inserting like lol into things to just cut the seriousness of what they're saying. I think that's an interesting thing to think about when making pictures, like how to kind of cut the seriousness of it, and I try to do that too, or have that in mind. Or like talk about really serious, intense politics, but in a way that like takes it down a notch, and memes definitely do that. sometimes not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of going off of that, I'm interested in the relationship between your exploration of object and exploration of the human. Like if you know, find an object and then from there you find this sort of humanistic commonality or something, some greater kind of human exploration or purpose, or if you just sort of let that emerge as you build your films and your photos and collages.
Wait, can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So the exploration of the object is in relation to the exploration of humans. So yeah, it's been really interesting, like your kind of archival way of going through things, and if from there you get themes of humanity that you then kind of build your work off of, or if you just let them kind of organically come up.
Yeah, well, when I made soft film, I was thinking a lot about like anthropology, or reading a lot of anthropology that specifically would say that the way we value objects can tell us about the way we value people, and that, I mean, this is not related to feminism in the original kind of literature or to like anything overtly political, even though that sounds like a really political idea, but just like early, I guess, cultural anthropology that kind of says that like the like cycles of ceasing to care, and maybe Walter Benjamin said this too, like the way that you kind of like stop caring about things so quickly under late capitalism tells us a lot about how we treat others. I don't know if that's your question though, but that idea kind of like blew my mind. And then I really like these objects where you can, I mentioned this already, but like where there are so many people in them but no people present at all. So like photographs that have been photographed kind of badly by the original photographer, or objects that have been touched by a million people. And I think there's something that will always seem worthwhile to me about showing those things and like bringing them back out of like junk drawers and basements, and yeah, and like also making art out of things that wouldn't be considered classically worth making art out of, and also making something like monumental out of really accessible small things that I can do by myself. Like, I came up in an era when like Gregory Crutzen and Jeff Wall were the main art photographers that we looked at, and having these huge production values was like what made good art photography. And so this is a total tangent to your question, but making like something really monumental and big, like especially the floral displays, I really had that in mind out of these objects that have been kind of used and then thrown away and that are small and that are often female coded or things from the home. Always seemed worthwhile to me.